Hello and welcome to Reality Check. Before we start, I want to tell you a little bit about our sponsor for this week. It's the iconic Chuck Norris, a guy I used to have on my bedroom wall. The martial artist hero who's still in his 80s and still kicking butt and still staying active. What's even more shocking is he's stronger, he can work out longer, and he even has plenty of energy left over for his grandkids. He did this by making just one change, and he says he still feels like he's in his 50s. His wife even started doing this one thing too, and she's never felt better. She says she feels 10 years younger, her body looks leaner, and she has energy all day. Chuck made a special video that explains everything. Make sure you watch it by going to chuckdefense.com/Ross. That's this link below this video. It will change the way you think about your health. Once again, that's chuckdefense.com/Ross. Now, let's get on and enjoy the show. Hello and welcome back to Reality Check. I'm your host, Ross Coulthart, and today I'm very excited to bring one of my favourite subjects, Russell Targ and remote viewing, to the show. Russell's probably one of the most knowledgeable and experienced researchers into one of the most controversial areas of parapsychology, remote viewing. His life story is so well told in his book and the recent movie, Third Eye Spies. Russell's a physicist, parapsychologist and author who was part of the team at Stanford Research Institute over half a century ago when he and Hal Puthoff experimented with the idea of remote viewing, using the human mind to gain impressions of a distant or unseen target. Mr. Targ also worked with Dr. Hal Puthoff on the so-called Stargate project, established in 1977 by the Defense Intelligence Agency with a California-based contractor, SRI International. The Stargate project went by various code names, very sinister-sounding names: Gondola Wish, Grill Flame, Center Lane, Project CF, Sunstreak, and Scanate. And then from 1991, it was called the Stargate Project. Officially, of course, mainstream science asserts that remote viewing is pseudoscience, that the ability to psychically see events, sights, or information from a great distance is nonsense. And officially, the Stargate Project was shut down in 1995 after a report by the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, concluded that it was never useful in any intelligence operation. That information was provided by the program was vague and included irrelevant and erroneous data. That was the CIA's conclusion, and that there were suspicions of interjudge reliability. 21 years ago, most of you will probably know about this film. The John Ronson book, The Men Who Stare at Goats, was made into a major film starring George Clooney, and that pretty much put a stake through the heart of credibility for the idea of remote viewing and psychical phenomena. But as anyone who's watched this show in recent months would know, we've started talking about the word psionic. And what better time to bring in Russell Targ? Russell, welcome. Welcome.
I'm happy to be with you. Happy to be with you, but psionic is a new term for me.
I was about to ask you, have you ever heard that word before in your time?
Only in your interviews.
So it blew me away when I looked at the history of the Stargate project to realize that this investigation into psionic research or psychical research is not new. And that essentially, until very recently, when your extensive documentation on the work that you did at SRI and the CIA, until very recently, it was all suppressed and censored, and we were being told by the CIA it was all stuff and nonsense. Can I first get, sir, your position? Do you believe, and I know you do, but what's your take on ESP, remote viewing, the whole claim of psychical phenomena?
I think the data. I'm a physicist like Michio Kaku, so I believe in the data. And we did remote viewing at SRI for 20 years, which in my job principally was to teach people how to get in touch with their psychic ability. So I would sit in my little office, and the person of the day would come, usually a government scientist like the Undersecretary of Defense. He wanted to support the work going on, but he wanted to see something psychic. So he said, "Can you show me how remote viewing works? Can you have Ingo Swan describe where my major is hiding?" And I said, "If Ingo does it, you're going to think it's a trick. Instead, I'll show you how to do it. And then when you leave here, you will have the drawing you made of where your major is hiding together with the photograph." He said, "I don't even believe in this stuff." And I said, "Well, many people have said that to me, but it's not a matter of belief. If you just quiet your mind and tell me about the surprising images that come into your awareness, we will find that you're able to make quite a nice drawing of where your major's hiding. You don't have to worry about a thing. Since only you know what images is in your mind, you can't do it wrong." So that's my non-program teaching from my favorite person, Carl Rogers, famous American. Carl Rogers taught us to be kind to our patients, and he was an expert at non-directional psychology. Mainly listen to your patients and be kind to them. So people would come in my office and with the purpose of learning how to do remote viewing, and I would just set them up with the instruction, "Tell me about the surprising images that come into your awareness where your major is hiding. Don't worry about, don't name it, don't try and guess, just tell me what you're experiencing." And that was my story for a decade. As people want to know, well, how do you teach people to do remote viewing? And the answer is, I give them permission. And that's really the story. I've had a favorite visit of a Israeli physicist who was brought to me to see what the trick is. How are we fooling people? So this his name is Yakin Aronoff, very famous physicist, got a Nobel Prize one of these days. And he was sitting with me, and I said, "Well, they want you to describe where they're hiding someplace in the Bay Area." He said, "I don't even believe in this stuff. When I close my eyes, it's dark. How about you?" And I said, "Well, you just tell me about your experiences." And he said, "I don't have any experiences." So I said, "Okay, just rest up. They'll be back in 20 minutes. And then I said, "Okay, they're going to be here in 10 minutes. I know you don't see anything. Pretend I'm a psychiatrist, and I just want you to free associate. And if you have to put something on a piece of paper to end the session, could you make a drawing of whatever comes into your mind? What do you feel compelled to draw?" And he said, "Well, I see a bunch of ducks from my mother's farm in Israel where she raises ducks." I said, "Well, that's great, Yaki. Can you draw me a duck?" And he said, "Of course I can draw you a duck." And he drew me a couple of ducks in a row. And then our lab director came back with Hal put off. He said, "Well, what have you got, Yakin?" He said, "Oh, I've just got this bunch of ducks that I drew." And Hal was amazed. He said, "You know where we were hiding?" He said, "Of course I don't know where you're hiding." He said, "Well, the random number generator sent us to the duck pond in Palo Alto."
Wow,
And
that's
I said, "Well,
fascinating.
that's what I do for a living. I just give the person permission to draw whatever image wants to become drawn, and then they make that drawing."
And
And with
just to finish the story about the Undersecretary of Defense, he did accurately find what he was looking for.
he drew where his major was hiding, which was the next town north in a art center, the Allied Arts, and he drew a picture of the building. And I have that in my notebook. And his
And I
name was
understand.
Walter LaBerge, Undersecretary of Defense, and he agreed to support our program.
So he was convinced after he'd seen what you'd encouraged him to do.
That's right. And that was my little job. My I was not doing remote viewing. In fact, they didn't want the physicists running the program to do psychic stuff because it puts the psychic stuff in a bad odor. You don't want to you don't want to combine the researchers with the psychics because you who knows what a psychic is going to do.
So, Russell, let's just take it as given. You obviously believe very strongly that remote viewing is real, that it is an intuition or an ability that human beings have that we're still in the process of explaining and uncovering. Is that a fair representation of your position?
Except for the belief part. And I'm a physicist, so I really people ask me, "Do you believe in remote viewing?" And I say, "We've used remote viewing to find hidden submarines, crashed airplanes. Jimmy Carter did a testimonial for us that we found an airplane in Africa that they couldn't find because it was in the jungle under the canopy, but the psychics in California found his Russian airplane." And after I left the program, I thought as we could harness this to forecast changes in the silver commodity market. So each for 9 weeks, I worked with a psychic, and each week he would make a forecast whether the market was going up a little, up a lot, down a little, or down a lot. And we were correct 9 weeks in a row and made $250,000 in the market. And that
Wow.
was published in the Wall Street Journal.
Are you
So,
still doing
so,
that kind of
so
market?
it's not that I believe in psychic abilities. Is that if you is that if you want to see something psychic, I can show you how to do it. Not today, but some other day we'll get together.
Sure. So I'm interested, Russell, in a moment that comes at the end of the movie Third Eye Spies, and you are scheduled to be meeting one of your remote viewers who's still working, allegedly, inside the program. And that's an allegation I want to follow up. And I notice Kit Green in the movie also says the same thing, that he understands the CIA and other agencies have continued to work with psionics or psychics over many decades since you were involved
See,
with
at the
S.
end of the program, I trained two of their people, two CIA people, to do. They came to see what do we do, what's the protocol, and I said, "Well, I'll show you how to do it." And both of them were quite psychic, and they went back to would do remote viewing with Pat Price, who was hired away from us. The CIA thought that Pat Price is too dangerous to leave loose with the psychic with the hippies in California because they knew from experiments that Price could just close his eyes and read the documents on Kit Green's table, and that scared the hell out of them. The fact that this cheerful policeman could just close his eyes and look down and see the top secret document on a guy's desk, because the CIA is all about keeping secrets. And the fact that we had these cheerful people running around our laboratory penetrating the CIA really scared the hell out of them.
Well, let's get to that because I'm fascinated with one story you tell about Sugar Grove, which is an NSA facility in, I think, rural Virginia. And I once did a story about the Echelon spy communications surveillance system and how Australia, US, UK, New Zealand, Canada were all involved in this secret communications spying. And one of the most secret bases is a place called Sugar Grove, operated by the National Security Agency. And I think it's still going. But back in the 70s, when you were doing this work, it was the most sensitive
It was
facility.
it was a listening post for listening into Soviet transmissions.
And as I understand it, one of the things you did was you asked, or Hal, I think, asked somebody in the SRI campus just to give him some coordinates. And
Well, it's really worse than that. Kit Green had never seen us do anything. So he said, I will give you some coordinates, and I know that you've never been there. So Kit gave us coordinates, and we gave those to Ingo Swan, who's a great natural psychic, and Pat Price, who's a psychic policeman. And Ingo drew a very good picture of that large military establishment, and Pat Price went into the military establishment, looked around, saw the filing cabinets, and said to himself, maybe they'd like me to read something for them. So he opened a drawer and wrote down the name of the place, some of the ongoing programs, and brought those to us. So we have, and we show those in this film, in our Third Eye Spies. We document it because it's such an unlikely thing to have happened. He came out with his notes of what was inside this top secret file and correctly named the place and correctly named several of the ongoing top secret programs when he came to us. And those were eventually agreed upon, documented by Kit Green when he came to see us. The
and I understand.
problem was the thing that Pat Price named so accurately were top secret programs of the NSA, and they were not amused that their neighbor at the CIA had sent some psychics to spy inside what is essentially the most secret thing in America. They penetrated the Sugar Grove listening post of the NSA for a lark. So we had a visit from the CIA, the NSA, and a couple of police cars visiting us at SRI, basically saying, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" They said, "Well, of all the things you could describe, why did you describe the inside of the NSA?" And Pat Price said, "Well, you gave us these coordinates, and in my experience, the more attention you have on hiding something, the more it shines like a beacon in psychic space."
Oh, right.
So as I was just sitting in my office and looking at the numbers you gave me, what came to me was this building inside, or went inside the building.
And the interesting thing is, you actually got the program name. Operation Pool Cue was correct. And he was literally reading the file names off a locked filing cabinet inside one of the most secure facilities in the United States intelligence establishment. That was a huge wake-up call for the intelligence community, wasn't it?
That's right. That's the sort of thing that puts me on call when you say, "Do you believe in ESP?" And I say, "No, it's not a matter of belief. I've seen it in my porridge every day in the morning."
Was Pat Price really able to track nuclear submarines as he allegedly claimed? I think once there's a story about how he had a map of the world and he had pins in the ocean and he
He
told
claims
colleagues.
he could do that. That he could follow submarines. Uh, in my experience, he was able to do whatever he said he could do. Because he was very, very accurate and not very boastful. That is, he knew that he was very psychic, but he didn't carry on as a psychic person. I mean, Ingo Swan functioned as a psychic person with his wings rattling and his bells shaking, and even though he was a fine artist, he sort of functioned as a psychic person. Pat Price didn't do that. Pat Price would go out and have his cherry coke and a hamburger for lunch and be a regular guy.
So I want to come back to something I asked you earlier, Russell. Do you think the CIA ever stopped working with psychics? Or do you think they've continued the program? Because it's a very clear inference at the end of the movie Third Eyed Spies that there has been a continuing psychic program operating inside the CIA.
Kit Green said that he thinks that they're continuing to go on, and indeed, why should they not? The remote viewing is easy to do pretty well, and people can improve their functioning with practice. Doesn't make them more psychic; they become more skillful. So why would the see? I have no firsthand data that the CIA is still going on, but it wouldn't make sense
Right.
because the intelligence community at Fort Meade, the people we taught how to do this in the Stargate program, with a bunch of army, sort of straight up army officers, were willing to take a chance on wrecking their career, joined us, and we chose 6 people off the floor of a gymnasium to come and work with us. And one of those people was Joe McMoneagle, who again turned out to be one of the most psychic people we ever worked with. And that program went on for a decade.
I really would like to explore, Russ, what you think is going on. And as you know, in the 50 years since you guys did your work, yourself and Dr. Hal Puthoff, there's been a broadening of knowledge in quantum physics. And as we know, in the 1930s, Albert Einstein talked about spooky action at a distance. And more importantly, in more recent years, there's been talk of what's called quantum interconnectedness.
Yeah,
The, the,
three physicists just got a Nobel Prize for quantum interconnectedness.
so can you
One
explain
of
to
the
me
things
what
that
you think is going on?
I can give you a sidebar on this. I often have very sharp dreams, and I don't take notes on my dreams, unfortunately. But if I have a very sharp dream, I'll tell my wife about it, and then so that if it occurs, I'll get credit for it. And a few months ago, I had a series of very sharp dreams in which I tell my wife about it, and then we would go to my computer, turn on the computer, and I would find my story right there on the screen. So, for example, I know relating a dream is about as interesting as trying to interest you in last night's acid trip, and I'll try not to do that. But for example, one day I had a very unusual dream in which I had the New York Times in front of me, and it's people rarely can read in a dream. And in this case, someone with the paper in my dream was telling me about that this is a celebration of a great French Impressionist artist. This is a celebration of him. So I woke up and I knew my wife, who's an artist, would be interested in this. And I told her about it. He said, well, that's a pretty accurate dream. Let's see what's in the New York Times. So New York Times is the opening page on my computer. So you just push a button and there's the New York Times. And there was Pablo Picasso on the front page of the New York Times celebrating his birthday. Now, as a physicist, I believe in causality.
So
So I believe that,
what's happening? Explain it to me. What do you think is happening in science?
well, my opinion, the thing that makes sense is that I have a dream, and that dream has to have some kind of a cause. And I believe that the cause is the interesting thing that I see when I wake up in the morning. So I believe that my wide awake 8 o'clock brain is entangled with my 6 o'clock sleeping brain. So I think those two brains are entangled with one another. And we can't prove that. But I was very happy when the guys got a Nobel Prize for entanglement, because I felt that the entangled impression is a good description of. See, I look for an answer. Why would I be dreaming about Picasso? He's not part of my repertoire. And I once had a dream about being at Esalen, where I used to teach at the Esalen Institute. Very nice dream about Esalen. I told Patty about that. My wife said, well, if you want to go to Esalen, we can go to Esalen. You haven't been there for a decade. And I said, well, maybe one day we'll go. So I turned on the computer, and I had a letter from Jeffrey Kripal, who's a psychologist of religion, and he sent me the first print of a film that he'd been working on for a decade, and that film opens up with a dozen people sitting in a circle in the big house at Esalen, and I'm in that circle.
It's fun.
So my dream was triggered by my seeing a picture of myself from 12 years ago that I get to see on the screen. So after I have enough of those very sharp dreams, I have to say, well, what's the cause? What could have possibly happened? I don't know what happened, but conceivably what could have happened. I say, well, what it looks like has happened is that I see the image at 10 o'clock, and that causes my brain was sleeping at 2 hours earlier to have that dream. And what I postulate, as you said, that there's an entanglement between my waking dream at 10 o'clock is entangled with my sleeping dream at 6 o'clock.
So one
So
of the people
that's
that I
how
know,
entanglement would help us with remote viewing.
right? One of the people that, funnily enough, I met at Esalen is Professor Stu Hammeroff. And Stu, I know you know of. He's a professor who has done work on how consciousness may not in fact reside in the brain necessarily, that it may in fact be non-local. And that might explain how our consciousness can move out of our body in remote viewing, as you've been able to demonstrate with people at SRI.
Yeah,
Do
all
you
the
think?
physicists who are doing this believe that characterizing remote viewing as non-local is on safe ground, because we know for a fact that a quiet mind can see into the distance and see into the future. That it is no harder to describe what's going on across the country or as it is to describe the object in the bottle. In fact, it's easier to describe the object across the country. In fact, I see over my shoulder here, I see a picture of an airport. And I was doing a series of experiments with Pat Price, where Hal had finally been released from SRI, was on vacation in South America, and his wealthy friends took him here and there in South America. And each day I was interviewing Pat Price, and Price described things about I see a cathedral, I see a harbor, I see a volcano, I see something else. And then on day 5, Price didn't show up. So it's like I'm sitting there with my face hanging out, talking into a tape recorder. And I said, well, Price doesn't seem to be here, so I'll have to do it myself. So I said, I don't know where they are, someplace south of the border. And I see something that looks like a airport on an island. I see a runway which ends in the ocean, and the airport building is on the left. There are trees and gravel on the right, and I'll draw that, and that's what I see. And that turned out to be the drawing that I have at the bottom of that picture, where Hal came back, and he had the photograph at the top of the picture. And that's basically as sharp a remote viewing of 2,000 miles away that we've ever seen in the program. That's the only remote viewing that I've done formally in the program. In fact, I rarely. I'm occasionally drawn in to do remote viewing to find things that people have lost, but that's another story. But in this case, um, I was sort of, let's finish the experiment. You're trying to do 5 trials of hell in South America someplace. And I drew this airport on an island, and that turned out to be exactly where it was. I didn't even know anything about an island airport. But the reason I have this on my wall is not to show off my psychic prowess, but rather to show that remote viewing is so easy that even a scientist can do it.
So, do you think everybody can do it? Do you think all humans are gifted with whatever this intuitive ability is?
In my experience, uh, almost everybody can do remote viewing to a greater or lesser degree. They're not all Pat Price or Ingo Swann, but I basically supported the program by having people come into my office, show them how to do remote viewing. So if this government manager would be able to do remote viewing himself, and he has his drawing in his hand, and he's got a photograph that his major took as they traveled through the Bay Area. Uh, he couldn't doubt it. It is, he wouldn't say I believe in remote viewing. He would say somehow I did that, and he would take that back to Virginia, back to Washington, and renew our contract. So
It's
and after the program, I was retired and did a lot of traveling, invitations to go here and there, and I must have taught hundreds of people how to do remote viewing. So my experience with remote viewing is that it's a natural ability, and most people can do it pretty well if they're sitting with somebody who can successfully give them confidence that they have it within them to do it.
Let's talk about what I think is probably the most dramatic example of remote viewing over a huge distance, and it's the Soviet facility known as Semipalatinsk. Can you tell me the story of what happened with an attempt by, I think it was Pat Price, or maybe it was Ingo, I can't remember which
That
one.
was Pat Price. That was an early experiment. They're on the wall, but they don't make it into your picture. Um, Kit Pat Kit Green was our day-to-day on site person with the CIA, and he showed up one day early in the program and said, "Let me give you some geographic coordinates, and I'd like Pat to describe what's there." And that meant that I would take this little scroll of numbers, and Pat and I would get a cup of coffee and go into our screen room, which is basically a phone booth covered with wire. It's electrically shielded. At that point, we were shielding the room so that nobody would secretly send in a signal to Uri Geller. We always were worried about our friend Andrea Puharich, who's a very skillful um, biophysics person. And we were friends for years. He had once showed me his electrostatic hearing aid, which you just put the signal right into your eighth nerve. So I didn't want. The main thing is that we not be deceived by a psychic. See, in the program at SRI, my credentials were I was a physicist and I was also an experienced magician. So my extra card is that I promised that we would never be deceived by some visiting magician who has some hot trick he's going to fool us with. So I had to be very vigilant to not be deceived by anybody.
So you've got Pat Price inside a Faraday cage, which is stopping any electromagnetic signals from getting in. He's vectoring into those coordinates. What happened?
He said, I'm lying on a building, and there's a giant gantry crane rolling back and forth over my body. The sun feels good. I can see this giant crane rolling back and forth over my body. And I said, that's terrific. Can you draw the crane? And he said, yeah, I can draw the crane. And he sat up, got his ruler, and made a drawing, quite accurate drawing, of a eight-wheel gantry crane with wheels on both sides of the track, and a small man. And he said, "There's a very big crane, and here's a picture of a tiny guy sitting next to it." So anyway, he made a drawing of this giant crane, which is shockingly like. First of all, most people don't even know what a gantry crane is, but he drew this eight-wheel gantry crane with wheels on either side of the track, just as he described. And the next day, they said, "Well, that was terrific, but we knew what it was. Wonder if he can describe something where we don't know the answer." Good question. He says, we don't know what they're doing here. Why do they have this whole thing set up with railroad tracks and gantry cranes? What are they making? And I said, well, we'll go and see what they're making. And we went back into our shielded room, and Price said, well, underneath there's a whole bunch of people in white coats, and they're trying to weld together a giant sphere, and they're making it out of gores. Another term of art. A gore is like an orange peel slice. Women's skirts are made out. They talk about 4 gore skirts, and it's like a orange peel slice welded together. And Price knew that from his life's experience, and he drew a picture of a giant sphere, but he said it's 60 feet in diameter. And to get to the end of the story, the sphere they're making was a steel sphere 60 feet in diameter, was part of a particle beam weapon that the Russians were building to shoot down the satellites that were taking the pictures that we had for our program. So the only thing, our program was top secret, and the reason it was top secret is not because we were so psychic, but the feedback we were getting is we were often asked to describe something like, what are the Russians doing in the secret build in their building, and the feedback we would get had to be derived from satellite photography, and the photographs that we were shown, that's what was top secret. It wasn't our psychic stuff was top secret. It was the feedback that was top secret. And in fact, he drew a very good picture of that sphere, and and that was released finally 2 years later after Price's death. So we did get pictures of the sphere with guys climbing up on the 60-foot sphere, but Price never got feedback. So that's a very important event. People say, well, maybe it's all precognitive, and Price was just looking in the notebook to see what you're going to show him the next day, because we know that works. But we'd like to make sure that something else that is not required. And the fact that Price could accurately describe the crane and the sphere with no feedback shows that he has direct contact with the target.
Do you believe that the remote viewing that Pat Price used for Semipalatinsk was better than satellite imagery?
I understand the question. I'm not an expert. Well, it's as good as satellite imagery. That is, you've probably seen our pictures somewhere. So we have a picture of the crane, and what Price drew is better than the pictures of the crane. So I would say, to take the hard picture, Price drew the pictures we had from Pat Price were better than the $1 million pictures we got from satellite images.
So I want to drill down, Russ, into why the CIA has continued to assert that psychic phenomena is nonsense. Their official position about the remote viewing program was that there was no proven efficacy with remote viewing, that there was never any demonstrated intelligence
Well, you
breakthrough.
won't be surprised if I tell you the CIA was a pretty crazy place to work for. For example, Hal and I were once giving a briefing on our work to a big group of people, and it turned out that somebody just walked out, and it's because he thought that it was satanic. That is, we were doing this stuff which only God could support, and since God was not supporting it, it must be the devil who was supporting us. And at the end of our program, it was the um, religious fanatics of the CIA who did us in. Nobody thought that we were peeking into Semipalatinsk or any other. There's no one ever found fault with what we were doing.
Do you think it's possible, Russ, though, that the CIA has intentionally led people to believe that psychical phenomena is not real because they've continued to use it for what we've discovered in the UAP program is a psychical psionic program? I'm just wondering whether it's possible that the reason for the deceit, and it is deceit, I mean, quite clearly from the documentation that's been declassified by the CIA, you did have successes with remote viewing. You helped the US government find a Russian bomber, a Tupolev bomber that had crashed in the African jungle. You helped find
Our
facilities
film
that.
opens with Jimmy Carter on camera describing that we found a downed bomber that no one else could find.
So
He said we have a recording of him saying that that's the most remarkable thing that happened to him during his presidency. Is some psychics in California told us where where the Russian bomber was found, where no one else could find it.
which leads me to the question: do you think it's likely or possible that the CIA has deliberately deceived its real opinion about remote viewing and psychical phenomena because it has secretly continued to use those techniques? I'm told that remote viewing in particular has continued inside the Pentagon. And I know because we recently did an interview with Jake Barber, and I know other people inside the legacy UAP retrieval program, people with psychical abilities are being used to connect psychically with non human technology. Do you think it's possible that the reason why the CIA pushed the line they did about your work is because they were trying to shut it down so that they could continue to operate covertly?
They were frightened of our work. In making the film, making Third Eye Spies, we had long days to chat with Ken Kress, and he just made it clear that they were afraid of what we were doing, especially people like me who weren't trammeled by their secret stories. That is, I was having too good a time with what I was doing, and what I was doing was helping people penetrate their secret buildings where Price would. We didn't do freelance spying. That is, Ken Kress would say, "Can you tell me what's on my desk?" I wouldn't. We wouldn't for the hell of it go penetrate his safe. I mean, we weren't doing silly things. We would only do things that they asked us to do, and they were often very sorry they asked us to do things, because they again and again would learn that, see, the basic purpose of the CIA is to hide things. And what they demonstrated for a decade is that they couldn't hide anything from an experienced psychic. So I think that they would like to pretend that there is no such thing as remote viewing.
Pat Price was so good at remote viewing, the CIA took him off you at SRI, didn't they?
That's right.
And sadly, shortly after he began work for the agency, he died in very unusual circumstances. Do you believe Pat Price was murdered?
It's my opinion is that he was murdered.
Who by?
Well, it's a somewhat complicated story. Price was an enthusiastic Scientologist. And what we learned by and by is that he was doing operational remote viewing for Ken Kress, where each day Price would have him look into the embassy of some foreign national.
And just to explain, Ken Kress I think he was the technical operations director for the CIA.
That's right. Kit Green was a psychologist and physician. Ken Kress gave us support, because one physicist to another. He was a physicist, and someplace early in the program, they said that these physicists could talk to each other. So they thought that Ken Kress would be a good guy to work with us. Sid Gottlieb was the one who ran the stealthy CIA program where they were poisoning people and so forth.
MK Ultra. I'll get to Sidney
MK
Gottlieb.
Ultra.
Yeah.
He was a supporter of our program. He was it's like any murderer can be somebody's nice uncle. So Sid Gottlieb was quite an amiable psychologist, friendly guy. Come in my office, we could chat about psychology or whatever you want. So as a person to deal with, he was quite amiable, and he was a friend of the program.
You mentioned the Scientologist connection to Pat Price, and I'm interested in that because I've heard a lot of stories about how Scientology has done an enormous amount of work into the area of psychical research, and that they are.
What I was beginning to tell you about is that we learned eventually that each day Kit Green would do a operational task with Pat, and they would look into some foreign embassy or some other forbidden place, and by they would get feedback, and Pat Price would then take that package together with his feedback and his drawing and send it to his interrogator at Scientology.
They were getting an insight into the
That's
CIA
right.
program.
In Scientology, you're supposed to get debriefed from your various remote viewing. So he would go to his monitor and get debriefed. And what he's getting debriefed from is all these top secret things that he was doing for the CIA and for Kit Green. Eventually, the CIA learned about that. We know that they did because the documents were all common knowledge. And we learned about it from a very, very angry Ken Kress, who learned that he was being betrayed. I mean, it's the worst betrayal at the CIA. If you're working with somebody on top secret material and he's handing it off to Scientology, there's no worse thing that he could have possibly done to betray you. And that's the truth. So my supposition that high on my list of people who might kill Pat Price would be somebody within the CIA who would consider the CIA had a problem. What do you do when Superman who's working for you is really a double agent? If
That's a
Superman
good.
is a double agent, putting him in jail will not solve your problem because you know that iron bars do not a prison make for a psychic. So you could put him in jail at Fort Meade and lock him up, but he could still read what's in your safe. So if a guy is truly psychic through space and time, there's nothing you can do with him.
I certainly hope the CIA didn't murder Pat Price, but it's a horrible thought that they might have done. It's also a horrible thought, frankly, that the Church of Scientology might have had access to some of the CIA's deepest secrets.
Oh,
Uh,
there's no doubt about that.
wow.
I know that they did because I saw the file. I have no knowledge that they might have murdered him. If you ask me, who would have considered murdering him? Of people that are not inside, top of the list would be the Russians, because we knew that we've seen Russian documents where Hal and I were already on the list of documents, and they knew about Pat Price and
So,
Ingo Swann. So it would not be shocking to know that some Russian saboteur came along and killed Pat Price.
so this is
I
the
mean,
interesting thing is that the Soviets were doing their own parapsychological research. They were
but not
working.
nearly as I was in Russia in 1983 and 84 as a guest of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. So and I was with my daughter, who's a fluent Russian speaker, and so we were treated very, very well in a pair of 2-week visits to the Soviet Union, and they were interested in our work. And they were one of the people we visited, a psychologist in Soviet Siberia, a nice psychologist, was doing pretty good work, and he was finding that people would often describe the target that they were going to be taken to for feedback before the target was chosen. So he said, our research is being contaminated by precognitive signals. And I said, yes, we have seen that. That shows that your people are pretty psychic, and you have to find a way to deal with that.
And so, how far advanced were the Soviets, do you believe, in that kind of psychical research? Do you think they were more advanced than the West?
I don't think they were more advanced. It's hard, you see, it's hard to make somebody be psychic in a place that's inherently not very free. That is, if you sit down in the Russian question booth and they're going to kill you if you give the wrong answer. It's not a very free, loving environment.
Which
So
that's a really
I
interesting.
think that
It's interesting that you use that point, loving. I'm quite struck by how a lot of the psionics that I'm talking to who are working in the program or now working with the Skywatcher team, who is this independent effort to engage with UAPs psychically, they talk about how the connection, it has to be trusting, it has to be quite loving. Is love part of this?
well, the book I have in my hand is Ingo's book, Psychic Sexuality, which is about love or sex on the astral plane. And Aleister Crowley is famous English researcher. So the people who are in a psychic mode of thinking can often link up with another distant person and make a uh, sexual, or Ingo has his own made up word. He talks about telesthesia, which is an actual word,
Yeah.
where telesthesia is different from telepathy. Telepathy is the mind-to-mind connection, whereas synesthesia is the heart-to-heart connection. And people who trust one another can have that experience.
One of the things, Russell, that fascinates me is conventional science. I'm showing this Nature article that was written about your SRI research in 1974 when you and Howell published for the first
That
time.
was our first article.
Yeah. And I read this paper, and it's almost a begrudging acknowledgement from Nature, which is probably one of the world's most prestigious scientific journals. They're saying this is not an establishment validation of telepathy or psionic or psychical behavior. But what they do say is that it suggests very, very strongly that it needs to be taken seriously and that there's need for further research.
And very generous of them because I know it caused them pain.
Well, New Scientist, the other scientific magazine, had a real swipe at you in the article that they did. They tried to demolish you and suggest that the work that was done by Israeli alleged psychic Uri Geller was just magicianry, clever sleight of hand. Can we talk about Uri? Because we've had him on Reality Check, and I love talking to Uri. He's great fun. He's a fantastic entertainer.
I'll answer your question. The third paper we published was a 25-page journal article in the Proceedings of the Electrical Engineers, where they let us talk in detail about remote viewing underwater, where could be no electrical signal. We put our psychics, Hella Hammond and Ingo Swan, we put them in a submerged submarine where 500 feet underwater, where there's absolutely, positively no electrical signal. So we answer the question, is the guy on the land sending a signal to the guy underwater? And the answer is no.
But somehow they were able to connect, weren't they? There was a demonstrated connection and exchange of information.
There's a demonstrated, that is, yes, that is, they could be describing their feedback of the future is always there unless they die, or there may be a path through the space-time that I worked with another physicist, Elizabeth Rauscher, and her theory was that we live in a world where the space and time are both complex quantities. And if they're complex quantities, it means that in geometry, the distance will be x squared plus y squared plus z squared, as you know from Pythagoras. If those numbers happen to be complex numbers, then you can add. Complex means that they're square root of -1. So it means that there will always be if we live in a complex space-time, that means there will always be a path from you to me where that path adds up to zero distance. My mind can search through the complex space-time and find a path from you to me where that path has no distance.
So in that year, forgive me for interrupting, but in that year, 1974, when you published both the IEEE paper and the Nature paper, David Davies, who was the editor of Nature, he actually said in an interview with Newsweek, he said, what we are saying to scientists is, here is what has been done in the name of science, talking about your SRA paper. Here are the accusations. Now go back and have another look. Now that was 51 years ago, 1974. Did establishment science truly go back and have another look?
Nothing we have done has ever been falsified. A lot of people are unhappy about what we were doing, but nobody's ever said. The worst thing they could say is that we were deceived by the people we're working with. That would be the worst thing.
But crucially, there hasn't been a lot of research at all into psychical phenomena in the last half a century, has there?
There has not been.
And does that frustrate you? Because in many ways, the fact of the lack of scientific research essentially proves the debunkers right. There's been no attempt to try to verify what you and
A
Howell
lot of
and
people
Kent
are
showed.
using remote viewing to forecast the market. The International Remote Viewing Association, or IRVA, has a whole house full of people who are supporting themselves by forecasting markets with remote viewing. Because if you do that carefully and don't get greedy, you can make quite a lot of money.
What do you think about the work of Uri Geller, the Israeli psychic? We've had him on Reality Check, and I find the evidence that you did with him at SRI, especially when he was in an enclosed, shielded room, I find the evidence quite compelling. Do you believe Uri Geller is psychic, or is he, as many debunkers suggest, just a clever magician?
Oh, I think that there were things we did with Uri were sound. The way we would do that, we had a whole bunch of pictures drawn by an artist, and they were in sealed envelopes. And basically, the initial experiments we did were with the vice president of SRI, and he would go to the safe and get a picture issued to him, which is to say they would give him a picture in a sealed envelope. He would give me the envelope, and I'd put it in my pocket and stay there. And then I would sit with Uri and warm him up to describe what I have in my pocket. We're going to show you later on. And I am totally confident that Geller could not see into my jacket. And since I didn't know it, the favorite trick a magician has is that he will start to draw and he will watch the person who owns the picture, because they will mimic the right answer by moving their head or their eyes. And I, of course, had no idea what the picture was. It could be these simple drawings of automobiles, the moon, the building, and so forth. Things that were, well, you've seen the drawings, and
They are
I'm
eerily similar. There are so many times when Uri quite correctly gets a very accurate description of the target. And as you say, it was double blind. You had no idea what was in the envelope. They were all
That's
sealed.
right.
And to me, that those are very compelling experiments. Is there a problem with science? Have we been deceiving ourselves? The way that psychical phenomena has been so quickly dismissed, peremptorily dismissed by the CIA, it's led the charge to dismiss the phenomenon of psychical phenomena. And I'm very skeptical that they're being truthful. I strongly believe that there's been intentional deceit by the CIA, because they have, I'm assured, continued their psychical research program for the last half a century. And I'm told there are people operating using remote viewing at the moment. It's very sad if research into an area that shows so much promise was effectively shut down because mainstream science was allegedly deceived.
The CIA itself was not our biggest customer. The biggest customer was the Army intelligence at Fort Meade, which is the Stargate program, where they had hundreds of people, hundreds of tasks uh, given to them. Find this. What are they doing here? What are they doing there? So there was more activity at the Stargate program at Fort Meade, which was Army intelligence, who's a little less squeamish than the CIA. And I think Joe McMoneagle is one of those people. And I think that you probably know other people in the Fort Meade program.
Sure.
And that was, they had hundreds of trials of finding things. describing the next accident, what happened on the ship, what's the next thing going to happen. So they were the Fort Meade people and Army intelligence were more big time users than the CIA, in my opinion.
Russ, there's work that was done in Stargate, Operation Stargate or Project Stargate, where remote viewers allegedly tried to find non human alien bases on this planet. And there's also remote viewing that was done on Mars and the moon. And I know it's really out there and it's been used by a lot of debunkers to scoff and attack. But were you involved in any of those attempts to remote view
I was
non-human
not,
intelligence?
but I'm trying to put my hands on a book that was just published, and I'm not going to be able to find it. The book was just published of drawings that Pat Price made of where 4 different bases were identified by him, where UFOs were hidden on the planet. One of those was in Alaska, one in Mexico, one in South America, one in Australia.
Mount Zeal, Australia. Yes, I can tell you I have gone and looked at that hill. It is a very nondescript hill, and if there are aliens inside it, they're not showing themselves.
Have you seen the book that was just published?
I'm aware of it. Yes, yes. Do you give it credibility? Do you give, I mean, from your knowledge of how remote viewing works, is it conceivable to you that, assuming there is a non human intelligence, a remote viewer could find evidence thereof?
Yes. Well, it's sort of two-part. If there are aliens, non-humans on the Earth, uh, I could task somebody where are they located, where's the base, and I would think that they could find it. In
And
general, a remote viewer can answer any question that has an answer.
to what level of accuracy?
Well, it depends what the question is. That is, in the forecasting of the stock market, you do that by identifying changes that they can't. A psychic can't read in general. So you want to know whether the market is going up or going down, up a lot or down a lot. So you tell them that the broker has 4 different objects. We don't know what they are. One of them is associated with the market going up. One is associated with going down. One is associated with something else. So you got four objects to describe, and I will hand you one next Friday. So here we are at my coffee table on Monday. Please tell me the object I'm going to put in your hand on Friday. He's not going to be able to tell you what the market says, but he can tell me accurately what I'm going to put in his hand. And we did that in the market on 9 weeks in a row, and we got them all correct.
Wow. All correct. 100%.
100% correct.
And what about the efficacy of long distance remote viewing? How accurate was that when you were able to check? I mean, obviously,
Increasing the distance didn't make any problem at all.
is it?
Ingo. One day, our first contract was with NASA. I talked with Werner von Braun about an ESP teaching machine that I have, and a four choice game,
Yep. Got it. Yep.
and you have to learn to push the button that's going to ring corresponding to a hit. Werner von Braun loved that game, did very, very well. And I told him I want support to build that game to teach astronauts how to be in touch with a spacecraft so they can sense accidents before they occur. That may not make any sense to you, but von Braun ate it up and took me to the the administrator, and they agreed that that was worth doing. So very quickly, Jim Fletcher is the guy head of NASA. So Fletcher and Von Braun gave me an okay, and a week later we met at SRI and with Charlie Anderson, and if we promised to keep a low profile, he would let us do that at SRI. So our initial money was from NASA for the ESP game. Now I can't remember what question you'd
No,
asked
no, it's
me.
funny. I guess what I was exploring with you was the
Oh, how
how,
accurate!
how accurate it was. Especially when you were doing long distance, and you made the point that
Oh,
over that distance
the
doesn't matter.
point of my the point of my story was one day during the program, Art Reitz, who was our contract monitor on the ESP game, he came by and he wanted to see how we doing. Are people learning? Are they getting better? And the answer is yes, they do get better. And he turned to Ingo and said, we're about to launch Pioneer 2 to Jupiter. Are we going to see anything new at Jupiter that we haven't seen before? It's going to be launched in a couple of days. And Ingo said, well, give me a pad of paper and I'll show you. And he made a drawing, which you've probably seen someplace, showing Jupiter with a sizable ring around it, ice ring that Ingo described. And Jupiter is 400 million miles away, and it took Ingo no time at all to correctly draw the ice ring around Jupiter.
And so Ingo Swann literally was the first person to correctly describe the rings of Jupiter,
That's right.
which is quite an interesting way of finishing our observations about remote viewing.
And my end of my story would be that remote viewing is a real phenomena, and it's easy to do if you work with a kind-hearted viewer who will interview you. The interviewer plays an important part in this game in keeping the ball rolling. Because basically, if you sit down with somebody and say, "What have I got in the box?" he'll say, "How should I know?" So you have to. It's the job of the interviewer to make that impossible seeming task to make it seem possible.
And to finish, obviously, remote viewing is one aspect of psychical phenomena, telepathy so called. Precognition and psychical communication are other parts, and also the allegation of psionic connection with non human intelligence or consciousness. Do you think they're all describing the same thing?
I think those are all related. The other fork of the road is the precognition, is the psychokinesis, which is what Uri Geller specialized in.
Well, let's finish with that. Do you believe that psychokinesis is real?
Well, we were very vigilant about not being deceived, so I'm sorry to say that Uri Geller never bent anything at SRI.
He did move
However,
a magnetometer, though. I was always very impressed with what he
yes,
demonstrated.
he was able to affect a magnetometer, and he could significant change the
And,
output of magnetometer.
and the thing
And,
I thought that was
Gerald
really
Quasset,
the thing I thought was
a Dutch psychic, also could affect the magnetometer. So it gives Geller extra credence if his buddy psychic could also do it.
now you've done work with psychokinesis yourself, and in fact, you've got a prop on your desk there that you showed me earlier.
Yeah,
Why don't we?
a little bit. I went to a so-called PK party where people get together. The organizer will have props, like this is a 3/8 inch aluminum rod,
So it's
and
a straight rod.
yes,
Can you
straight
hold it up for
rod.
the audience to see? Just put it up in front of your camera, please. Thank you. Yeah.
He had a straight rod. And my job was, as I chose, I'd never done this before because I hate to do things that don't work. So I was with a group of people, and somebody just handed me a rod. So I just sat there and closed my eyes, carefully held it by its end because I'm pretty strong. I didn't want to smash the rod with my big paws. So I held the rod at the end quietly with my eyes shut, and I realized that I was drawing a crowd. So I opened my eyes, and my rod had turned into this.
And so you weren't bending that? You were just holding it in
I
one
was
hand?
just holding it carefully at the ends, and it just melted in my hand.
And did you have the sensation of it melting in your hand?
I had the sensation of it. I identified it as a screen door spring. You know what that would be?
Sure.
That's the way I felt. I felt that it just was suddenly getting weak. And I was aware that I was holding it by. See, I was very carefully holding it at the end because I didn't want to mash it with my hands. I was carefully holding it at the end. And I then noticed that I was able to bend that with my fingertips.
Well, Russ, you've certainly given us a lot of food for thought today, and I'm told, I know that there are intelligence agencies, Defense Department people who are still using psychical phenomena,
I'm
even though
happy
they
to
go,
know that.
and they go to great efforts to try and conceal it and hide it. But it's lovely to know more about your research from half a century ago. The tragedy is how it's been suppressed from public knowledge for so long. Russell Targ, thank you so much for speaking to Reality Check.
Very happy to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
It's a real honour. And if any of you have got any questions that you'd like to ask me, we're doing our now regular Q&A segment on Reality Check, and you can send an email asking me questions to realitycheck@newsnationnow.com. Russell Targ, thank you so much indeed. Real pleasure to speak
And
with you, sir.
my book, Third Eye Spies, is available and answers a lot of questions, quite comprehensive, and answers a lot of questions as you have been asking me.
Well, I look forward to learning how to remote view. Thank you so
There you
much.
go.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And please don't forget to click that red subscribe button to ensure you get more of NewsNation's unbiased and fact-driven news coverage.